Hello everybody, today on Declassified I am looking at a car that has been a near constant source of temptation from the day it was released, the X150 generation Jaguar XKR, and with its predecessor now being seen as a genuine classic and its indirect successor, the F-Type, having just been discontinued, I think this is the perfect moment to re-evaluate the middle child of the range, one that I think could be the best value Jaguar car out there. Ahead of today's video, I wish to say a big thank you to our headline sponsor, Dodo Juice, whose products have been keeping the JAYEMM fleet clean and shiny for quite a while now. And though they are best known for their incredible range of waxes, they do have a complete lineup of other products too, including their mint condition rapid detailer, which is a vital tool for myself as I need it when I'm cleaning cars ahead of filming, such as today. Don't forget, for a special discount of 10% off on anything in the Dodo Juice range, just visit their official website and use my code JAYEMM10. In the modern era, there have been two distinct generations of the Jaguar XK. The first was launched back in 1996 and is known as the X100. Though on the surface it was an all-new car, underneath it was not, owing much to the already old Jaguar XK-S and by extension its sister car, the Aston Martin DB7. That was in production until 2005, when it was discontinued and replaced with this, the X150. Unlike its predecessor, the new car, which in entry-level guise was now known simply as the XK rather than XKR8, was built on an all-new bonded and riveted aluminium platform that featured just two welds, one either side of the roof. This was considerably lighter and stiffer than the old steel platform, so despite the fact the car grew quite a bit, it also lost a fair amount of weight and gained an appreciable amount of stiffness, some 50% in coupe guise and 30% in convertible form. The platform is closely related to that in the then also new X350 generation XJ, and it had a fairly long and successful life because it was a shortened version of the same chassis that formed the basis of the later F-Type, which many consider to be this car's successor, but I don't, for three key reasons. First off, there was some considerable overlap in the sale period of the two cars because the F-Type launched initially as a convertible only. Secondly, the F-Type is a strict two-seater. This is a 2+2. And finally, the F-Type is a more overtly sporting car, where the XK retains much of the GT characteristics you'd expect from a Jag. But don't take that to mean that this is a soft or wallowy car to drive. Despite its reputation as a bit of a grandad wagon, if you put your foot down in just about any XK, it should impress. The steering doesn't have the heft or the accuracy of an Aston Martin, but this car wasn't trying to be one of those. Instead, it still has the ability that you require, and it will still talk to you. But everything is just a little bit more muted, a little bit more filtered, making this a very nice car to live with day to day. As the model neared its eventual retirement in 2014, a number of more focused, sporting models were introduced which will certainly appeal to the keener driver. However, no matter which XK you choose, there is a lot to like, including the fact that every single one of them is equipped with a fabulous V8. And you'll find that under this beautiful front-hinged bonnet. The original XK launched with an engine lineup that was essentially carried over from the old model. So you had a 4.2-litre V8, available first as a naturally aspirated item, making 300 horsepower, then soon after a supercharged variant for the XKR, making 420 horsepower. They all make a decent noise, though in standard guise, some of them can be considered a little bit muted. So don't be put off by a car which has an aftermarket exhaust. Many consider it a necessity. The R can be easily differentiated on account of its bonnet vents, the quad exit exhausts at the back, and the R badging throughout. The car was available as both a coupe and a convertible, though for me it's only ever been the coupe I've wanted on account of the fact it has that gorgeous side profile and of course slightly better dynamics. The appeal of the convertible should also not be ignored. If you're simply after a car to waft down to the pub on a beautiful summer's day, there are few better ways to do it. The X150 is not a particularly small car. It's 4.8 metres long and 1.9 metres wide, making it marginally larger than an Aston Martin DB9 and about the same footprint as a Ford Mustang. It is, however, considerably smaller than either a Maserati Gran Turismo or a Bentley Continental GT. The penalty for that svelte bodyline comes in terms of interior packaging. Even the front seats in an XK are not as generous as you might think they should be, and the rears are borderline unusable, only really suitable for children, which is handy because they do at least have Isofix in them. The boot, meanwhile, is quite a bit better. The Coupe has very decent space, and the Convertible still a fair bit, roughly equivalent, I would say, to the F-Type, perhaps a little bit better. In any case, every XK should have more than enough stowage for a romantic weekend away for two, or a trip to the continent if you're happy to use soft bags. Overall, I'd say it's a very usable car, and compared with many others in this class, like an Aston Martin, it is still pretty generous. During the XK's production run, many other Jaguar products acquired four-wheel drive and an 8-speed automatic gearbox, but the XK never got either. It remained rear-wheel drive only for the entirety of its life and never got the 8-speed, sticking instead with a 6-speed ZF Auto. The biggest changes for the car came in 2009 when it received a facelift. On the outside, you'd be hard-pressed to tell what was changed. The bumpers were revised front and rear, but the alteration was subtle. Inside, the easiest way to tell is the fact the old Jaguar J-gate selector for the gearbox was replaced with the more modern rotary dial, as you see in this car. That was connected to a slightly improved version of the 6-speed auto, but the big news was to be found under the bonnet. Out went the 4.2-litre engines, and in came a new third-generation 5-litre V8, designed and built explicitly for the needs of Jaguar and later Land Rover. This was not in any way, shape or form related to a Ford engine of the time, even though it does have Ford Motor Company stamped on the parts, and has led many, including myself, to say that it was just a rebadged Mustang engine. It is not. Power was up for the naturally aspirated version to 385 horsepower, and the new flagship XKR got 510, with a massive 461 pound-foot of torque, that's 625 newton meters. Another facelift came in 2011, but was minor. The big news for that year, though, was the introduction of a new flagship variant, the XKR-S. The RS badging had actually appeared on a number of Jaguar products previously, including the first generation X100 and also the 4.2-litre version of the X150, where the RS gifted you Alcon brakes, nicer wheels, a top speed of 174, still limited, and a lower, stiffer suspension setup. Those cars are fairly subtle and easily missed, though to my mind they're actually one of the hidden gems in the XK lineup. However, the new RS was nowhere near as subtle, packing an incredible and rather wild body kit that divides opinions. It also came with a 550 horsepower version of the supercharged V8, the obligatory lower, stiffer suspension, different alloys, bigger brakes, and a shouty exhaust. It promised to be the most hardcore variant of the XK yet, and I think it was. It was also one of the most expensive, just under £100,000, and carried the distinction of being the most powerful Jaguar production car since the introduction of the XJ220, both having the same peak power figure of 542 bhp. But I must be getting old, because a few years ago I thought those were the coolest looking Jag ever. But now I think maybe they're a little bit too much. Instead, I'd want something a tad more subtle. And so if you're on the hunt for a driver-focused Jag that isn't so shouty, this could be the perfect find. It's the XKR75. Built in extremely limited numbers, just 50 for Europe, 25 for the UK, and none for anybody else, so a total of 75, the XKR75 is a production version of Kermit, the bright green XKR which had slithered its way noisily up the Goodwood Hill only a year before. It was designed to be the most focused and sporting variant of the XKR to date, and laid the groundwork for the later XKR-S, which followed a year after. To that end, you have subtle bodywork alterations, much like on the speed pack equipped cars. So you've got a more aggressive splitter at the front, extra side sill extensions, a much more pronounced rear spoiler, and a new rear diffuser. You also have these beautiful alloy wheels, bigger brakes, a lower, stiffer suspension with springs up by roughly 30%. You also have 530 horsepower out of the 5-litre supercharged V8 and a slightly noisier exhaust too. They even went to the extent of giving the car all new, fully machined aluminium uprights to give the car even more camber. The gearbox and traction control software was also altered to make this every bit as engaging and dynamic as they felt an XK should be. They also came with optional graphics, and this car is currently wearing only half of them. If you think you recognise it, it's because I've actually driven this exact car before, and I want to say a huge thank you to its owner Roger for agreeing to bring it out once more for today's buyer's guide. If you would like to see my review of it, please follow the link which will be in the description, or if I can remember, up here as well. When new, they cost just over £85,000, though today, good luck trying to even find one. I couldn't tell you what they're worth because there simply aren't any for sale, on account of the fact they just didn't make that many. The RS, by comparison, is a relatively common car. But if you are looking for the ultimate driver-focused XK, it's not the 75, it's not the RS, it's the oft-forgotten XKR-S GT, essentially the swan song for the model. It featured an even less subtle body kit with an even bigger wing than the RS, canards and a slightly stripped-out interior. It had the same power, an even shoutier exhaust, and promised to be the most driver-focused XKR yet. It was also the most expensive, at over £130,000, and today, because it's such a rare thing, you'd still pay nearly that to get your hands on one. And I simply can't tell you if it's worth it, because I've never even sat in one. I hope to rectify this one day, but for now, I'm going to kind of ignore it, because I suspect the majority of people looking for an XK aren't on the hunt for a GT. Instead, you want something a bit like this, and it is going to be better value. It just is. So then, what are you to be paying to get your hands on a Jaguar XK? As the older X100 has now firmly entered classic territory, the X150 is actually often the cheapest of them all, with prices of an early naturally aspirated 4.2 starting at £6,500 and an early supercharged XKR £6,000. Which doesn't sound right, and should probably tell you how bad that car really is. To get your hands on a decent 4.2 litre R, I'd recommend instead parting with around 10,000 quid. For a 5 litre car in naturally aspirated guise, pay a little bit more, say £12,000, and for a 5 litre XKR, you're looking really at about 16 to 20,000, and the XKR-S anywhere from 40 to 65 grand. And at all points on that scale, I think these are cars which offer sensational value for money, particularly when compared with the Maserati or Aston Martin equivalent. In fact, even compared with many a 911, these are a genuinely easy car to live with that hopefully shouldn't break the bank. But that is not to say that they are trouble-free, though unlike their predecessor, which had a steel body, they don't suffer from rust, they can suffer from aluminium corrosion. The core of the car has proven to be very durable and stood the test of time well, but do keep an eye out along the edges where all the panels meet. Not only should these be nice and even, they should be free of any bubbling, which, if it is present, can be costly to sort. Another key thing to be aware of is the fact these were one of the first cars in the world to introduce under-bonnet airbags, the purpose of which was to enable the car to keep that nice low line at the front and also meet then new pedestrian crash safety regulations. In short, if you hit something with this car, airbags will deploy, lifting the bonnet up, giving the car extra space between the top of the engine, which is fairly hard, and the bonnet, which should have some flex in it. The upside, of course, is the car looks better and is a little bit safer for whatever poor sap you've hit. The downside is that can make a previously fairly cheap collision quite an expensive one, and it's not unheard of for unscrupulous types to repair a car without putting the airbags back in, and that is an issue and an MOT failure. So if you're looking at a car that you know has had an accident in the past, make sure those have been replaced and the work all done correctly, so if you have an incident in the future, they all deploy as they're supposed to. The suspension of the XK is relatively sophisticated, double wishbone front and rear with adaptive dampers as standard. Though it is generally hard wearing, at the age these cars are now, it's not unheard of for them to require some maintenance. The dampers themselves tend to last 50 to 60,000 miles or more and aren't too expensive, about £350. However, it's actually the smaller items that can add up, bushes, bearings and the like. At the age and mileage many of these cars are, I would expect many of these items to need replacing, particularly if you want the car to drive as it should. Though Jaguar themselves won't sell you an individual piece, instead preferring to sell you a whole arm, there are plenty of other solutions from the aftermarket, so you can attend to just 1 or 2 bits if required. The truth is, though, that if one thing needs doing, chances are many others will. So a small £100 or £200 bill can quickly escalate into a £1,000 or £2,000 one. And if you're unsure as to whether any of these components might need doing and you don't want to pay for a full specialist inspection, I recommend instead take the car to a local MOT tester, offer to pay them their MOT fee for a mock inspection, and they'll give the car a look over and tell you if any parts of the suspension look like they may need a bit of work. The 6-speed ZF gearbox is generally quite durable, but it was also an item, as were many at the time, badged as sealed for life, and even ZF will now admit that is nonsense. They do need servicing, and if it's not shifting right, for example at low speeds, first to second being harsh, or in manual mode not responding quickly, then it may simply need a service. I have actually seen cars sold with a broken gearbox that in fact was nothing of the sort. And to service them is not that bad. The kit itself is about £250 and comprises a new sump with integrated filter and the oil you'll need, and to fit it should take a couple of hours labour. But make sure it's done by someone that knows what they're doing, because if you do it wrong, you can cause quite a few issues. The differential on the early cars is known to be something of a weakness. I can't say I've heard of too many failures, but when doing my research, it was something that cropped up. And the issue is you cannot replace it like for like. Instead, you have to upgrade it to the later type, which means you also need new drive shafts too. So that can get quite expensive. Budget, I would say between £1,000 to £2,000. An exact figure was difficult to find, as it was for regular servicing costs on these cars. Just about everything else I've done a guide for, there are plenty of people out there willing to tell you exactly what you'd have to pay. But with the XK, not so much. The service schedule is actually different for the 4.2 or the 5-litre cars, with the earlier ones having 10,000-mile intervals and the later 15. It is particularly important for the 4.2 that that schedule is adhered to, and if it is, then they should be very durable indeed, as are the 5 litres. But if I were buying a Jag now, I'd service it at 10,000 miles or annually regardless. The cost of an oil change isn't that much, as little as a couple of £100, though these are cars generally regarded as not being very DIY friendly if that's your bag. The big issue for me, in terms of research, was the fact there isn't much on this which is set to be done at certain time intervals. There isn't really a regular minor major service pattern as you get with many other cars. Instead, it's all based on condition. BMW introduced a similar system at the time. So the car will essentially tell the dealer what it needs, meaning your service could be anything from a basic oil and filter change up to something a lot more involved. To give you some idea, at a recent service, Roger did a full service of the car, including all the things you would expect, plus a service of the supercharger with supercharger belt and the gearbox too. That came to just about £1,800, and I would say is about as bad as a regular service is ever going to be on one of these, with the majority of them being quite a bit less. Most consumables on the car are fairly reasonably priced. Brakes can be had from around £200 an axle up to about £600 for the higher performance variants, excluding the GT, which has ceramics. One word of caution, if you need to do anything to the parking brake, it is electronic and requires specialist software to be able to actuate it. Tyres are also fairly reasonable. You can get a set from £600 to £1,000, and I would pay particular attention to those. This car does have a limited slip rear differential that thinks it's clever, but it's not. So if you want the car to grip and perform as it should, do put the best quality rubber you can on it. And if you're looking at buying, inspect the rubber for age. Older tyres on cars like this may appear to be absolutely fine, but I guarantee you, drive them in any conditions other than perfectly dry and you will really suffer. I have personally driven 2 near identical XKRs in a very short space of time on the same roads in vaguely the same conditions. One of them was an absolute joy, the other was near undrivable and lethal. The difference, simply the age of the tyres. Both had tread, both looked good, but one was simply old. Pay attention to it. One quirk of the 5-litre cars is that they have, like a BMW, a coolant hose that runs between the V, and it is prone on occasion to leaking. Though the consequences are rarely severe, the cost of fixing it is quite high, around £1,500 to £2,000, and unfortunately there is no real easy way to diagnose it when you're simply looking at a car. Instead, go through the history folder with the vehicle, which should be extensive and detailed, and see whether previous owners have complained of coolant loss without any rectification being made. If that is the case, that could be your culprit. A decent history folder with a car like this, to me, is essential because it will tell you a great many things. First off, the work which has already been done and therefore you shouldn't have to do with luck, and also how well the car has been cared for. Has this been a car owned by someone who, when they've been given a problem, has simply dealt with it, or have they let it go for a little longer than they should have done? Inside, you should find an interior which can only be described as sumptuous. Though perhaps not quite as bespoke as an Aston Martin, it still has acres of leather, carbon fibre, wood or aluminium depending on specification, and feels miles more special than a 911 of the time. Closer instead really to a Maserati. Expect a small amount of wear in the usual places for high-mile examples, but overall the car should not feel like it's falling apart. If it does, run away. Check all of the electrics work, there are lots to go through, including seat adjustment, lights, horn, the usual suspects, and pay particular attention to any warning or error messages. The car should come with 2 keys, each of which has a remote fob and a manual blade to unlock the car in the event of a flat battery. Speaking of which, it is not apparently uncommon for XK batteries to be replaced relatively frequently, as a weak one can cause all sorts of electrical gremlins. Overall, the XK should be a very easy car to live with. Access to car parks and the like is better than you'd find in an equivalent 911, and though the interior space isn't really any better, the car is much more comfortable over long distances, and I think a superb grand tourer in the truest sense of the word. I think these cars have aged incredibly well, and they remain entertaining to drive, with the sportier variants being much more capable than you might think. And they all come complete with Jaguar's secret weapon. I call it the Jagosphere. And it's the fact that just about everything to do with these cars is lovely. You get into a Jag, it's lovely. You sit down into it, you're relaxed, you're calmed, all your worries simply melt away. You'll be let out at junctions, people will love you. Buy a Porsche, they'll think you're a prick. Buy a Jaguar and your neighbour will invite you around to have tea with his wife and chuck car keys in a bowl. This is a very cool car owned by cool and discerning people. It's also considerably rarer than any 911 too. In the time it was in production, they made just about 51,000, depending on who you ask, but I do believe that number. In other words, that's about 2 years of 911 production stretched over about 8. I know that for many, the automatic gearbox will be a deal breaker, but I implore you, give an XK a chance. I have had the good fortune of driving many, and every single one of them has its own appeal. From a naturally aspirated 4.2-litre convertible, the least dynamic, the least sporty of them all, that was a sensational cruiser and a wonderful place to spend some time, up to and including the XKR-S, a fire-breathing monster of a car that gives you proper supercar baiting performance at relatively sensible money. Each and every single one of these cars has been an absolute event, and it's for that reason it remains something that is a constant temptation. It's only really the fact that it isn't super practical nor super sporty that's ever stopped me from buying one. But every single one of these grey hairs that appears tells me I really should get myself an XK before it's a little bit too late and they're all grey. Then I'll have to buy a Bentley. In terms of rivals, well, a 911 seems far too obvious, as does an M3. Instead, your Jag buyer would be looking at things like a Maserati, and depending on your budget, you'd be comparing this with either a 4200, the Coupe, or the Gran Turismo. Both of those are a little bit more practical, having much more room in the back seats. However, they're also going to be considerably more expensive to run. In terms of fuel economy, a Maserati will struggle for 25 even on a run, but these will achieve about 30 if you ask them very, very nicely. In Europe though, other real genuine rivals are fairly limited. In the States you have a few more, like the Corvette and the Dodge Viper, but here, I suppose at the upper end of the scale, you'd be looking at something like the Lexus LC500, which is a fabulous car with a slightly different character, but still has all the appeal of this, yet sadly still lacking in terms of back seats. Instead, I'd say a genuine alternative might be the BMW M6 in either V10 or turbocharged V8 guise. However, if that is still a little bit too mainstream for you, then might I suggest to sir a Bentley Continental GT. Again, a brave choice, but I think that's really where you'd have to go if you want to take the qualities the Jag has and just add to all of them without compromise. And that really should tell you just how special this car is, because anything and everything I compare it to is either a Porsche, Maserati, Aston Martin or Bentley. Jag should be very proud of this. And if you're currently thinking of buying one, I'd maybe hurry up before everybody else realises how good they actually are. Thanks to you for watching, and a big thanks to Roger for bringing his car out once again. Don't forget to hit the like button, comment down below, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you for the next one. Bye bye.